Welcome to this video on the mock trial case of New York versus Gitlow. This case involved the state of New York prosecuting Benjamin Gitlow, a socialist, for publishing the left-wing manifesto. The trial focused on whether Gitlow advocated the overthrow of government by force, laying the foundation for the Supreme Court's incorporation of the First Amendment. In July 1919, Gitlow and his colleagues published the left-wing manifesto, praising the Russian Revolution and calling for proletarian revolution in the U.S. He was arrested under New York's criminal anarchy law. The state argued the manifesto advocated violent overthrow, while Gitlow claimed it was theoretical political analysis. New York's criminal anarchy law was enacted in 1902 after President McKinley's assassination. It made it a felony to advocate violent government overthrow and prohibited promoting the doctrine of criminal anarchy. The core constitutional question presented was whether the New York law violated Gitlow's free speech rights. This questioned if the First Amendment applied to state governments through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, and if the manifesto was protected. This video examines the Gitlow versus New York prosecution case. The prosecution sought to punish dangerous revolutionary speech, focusing on the printed words themselves. New York argued that the manifesto's words inherently posed a threat to the state, eliminating the need to prove the speech incited immediate action. The main arguments by the prosecution were that Gitlow's revolutionary speech, based on the manifesto's content, inherently threatened the government. They argued they did not need to prove the speech incited action. Arguments against incorporation held that the original Constitution only applied to the federal government. States feared federal overreach, and opponents argued the 14th Amendment was not intended for incorporating the Bill of Rights to state action. The prosecution presented several witnesses, including Detective Edward J. Smith, Officer John J. Grant, Mr. R., Attorney General Albert C. Burroughs, and James L. Harris. Detective Smith was crucial to Gitlow's arrest. He located the left-wing manifesto pamphlet, and this discovery became key evidence for the state's case. Detective Smith, who worked in the NYC Police Department's Political Crimes Division, testified about seizing 24 copies of the manifesto. This evidence provided a concrete link between Gitlow's organization and the incendiary content. Officer Grant corroborated Detective Smith's account of the seizure. He also testified that the pamphlets were openly distributed on the Lower East Side, confirming the public dissemination of the revolutionary document. Officer Grant, the seizure officer, confirmed that the pamphlets were distributed openly on the streets. His testimony supported the prosecution's claim that the document was widely disseminated. Mr. R., referred to as the buyer, provided key testimony about purchasing the left-wing manifesto pamphlets. His purchase confirmed Gitlow's distribution efforts and was used as evidence by the state. Mr. R., an informant, testified that Gitlow himself read the manifesto aloud at a secret meeting, urging its publication. This testimony linked Gitlow personally to the act of publication, providing the prosecution's, quote, smoking gun. Attorney General Burroughs, the prosecutor, argued that the left-wing manifesto posed a clear danger. His legal argument stressed the inherent threat of the words and maintained the state's right to prevent revolution. Burroughs framed the anarchy law as a defense of order, not censorship. He stated its purpose was to protect the republic from those who would incite the overthrow of the government through treasonous material. Newspaper editor James L. Harris testified that pamphlets like the manifesto serve as rallying points, urging men to take up arms against authorities. He argued the language was a blueprint for action, not abstract theory. James L. Harris was a key prosecution witness, testifying that the manifesto was more than political theory. His testimony supported the argument that this was a call for action, not protected free speech. Dr. Arthur L. Mills, a labor economist, presented a risk assessment, arguing that the literature correlated with public disorder. This gave the prosecution an empirical foundation for claiming the manifesto presented a, quote, clear and present danger. This scene displays Gitlow's defense team. The defense theory held that Gitlow's manifesto was merely political theory and not criminal incitement. They claimed the abstract discussion of revolution was protected free speech under the law. Gitlow's defense argued that the manifesto was purely abstract political theory. They maintained that the writing was protected free speech and was not intended to incite immediate violent action. Arguments for incorporation stated that the 14th Amendment guarantees essential liberties, requiring states to respect fundamental rights. Incorporation ensures uniform protection of the Bill of Rights across the nation. This scene highlights the arguments made by the Gitlow defense team. Economist Scott Nearing testified for the defense, arguing the manifesto was economic analysis and theoretical political speech. His testimony maintained that the text did not constitute incitement. Crystal Eastman provided key context for the defense, describing the manifesto as political analysis. Her testimony was used to argue that the document was not an incitement to violence. Louis Boudin, a legal expert, argued that the manifesto was a political analysis of history, not an incitement to immediate action. His testimony supported Gitlow's free speech rights claim. William Bross Lloyd, a key defense witness, testified about the manifesto's political context. He affirmed that the document was not criminal incitement, supporting the claim of protected free speech. Socialist leader Norman Thomas testified that the manifesto was purely political theory and not intended to incite violence. He defended the text as protected political speech. In February 1920, Benjamin Gitlow was found guilty of violating the criminal anarchy law and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. The conviction was subsequently affirmed by higher state courts. Gitlow appealed his conviction through the state courts. Both the Appellate Division and the New York Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, affirmed the guilty verdict, with the final decision issued in 1922. Gitlow challenged the constitutionality of the New York statute, arguing the law violated his due process rights. The core issue was whether his free speech was protected by the 14th Amendment, making the First Amendment applicable to the states. The Supreme Court granted certiorari in 1923 to review the constitutional challenge of the Gitlow case. Oral arguments were presented to the justices that same year. The court found that the First Amendment applies to states through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, making freedom of speech a fundamental liberty. However, the Supreme Court ultimately affirmed Gitlow's conviction. This scene marks the end of the video presentation on New York versus Gitlow.